Welcome to The Writing Life. My name is E. Ethelbert Miller, and my guest today is Tyehimba Jess. Tyehimba Jess is the author of two groundbreaking collections of poetry, Leadbelly, which won the National Poetry Series Award in 2004, and Olio, the 2017 winner of the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. So good to see you.
Great to be here.
Take us back to Detroit, the Motor City.
Yeah.
Take us into your house. What
Wow.
kind of music are you listening to?
Wow. That's taken us way back. You know, Detroit was such a great place to get bathed in the Motown, but also and the Ray Charles. My folks used to listen to a lot of Ray Charles, and you know, I remember rifling through my brother's records, and you know Barry White, and then everything from there to Led Zeppelin and back and forth, and listen to Electrifying Mojo, who was this fantastic radio DJ who would use the airwaves to land a mothership over the city of Detroit and bring us all the funk from around the country. So there was so much. There's such a kind of a musical polyglot with the strongest undercurrent being the Motown thing happening in R&B.
I say that because when I was reading, especially the first selections in Olio, it seems as if you're looking at black music on a level where it almost seems that it exists before history. It's sort of something very mystical. It seems as if you're a singer, you plug into something that's part of the universe development. And I was just wondering that when you look at this music, is it something that you have to really pay special attention to where you hear the music on different levels?
You know, I think that what happened particularly with Olio is that I became interested in the blues and folk, and then I became interested in the music before the music was being recorded electronically or on tape or in any kind of way. So I became really interested in the story of the musicians and the artists that were working in that time before the Harlem Renaissance and before the dawn of recorded sound. And I was starting to really think about, you know, the embodied sound versus the disembodied sound that we typically hear when we're listening to music today.
Read your poem, Blind Tom, Plays On, and talk a little bit about who Blind Tom is.
Yeah, Blind Tom was a blind and autistic man born a slave in Georgia in around the late 1840s. And he was owned by the same family more or less throughout his entire life up until the early part of the 20th century. They were caretaking him, so to speak, but at the same time, they were using his labor on the piano. He had a kind of phonographic memory where he could reproduce sound, and he also produced his own compositions. And he was a master of piano. So they used that talent to glean profit from that talent, and they gained anywhere from $800,000 to $1 million in profit from him over the course of his life. And this poem is Blind Tom Plays On. It's the end of a sequence of sonnets about Blind Tom, and it's in his voice. Who am I to deny this world, this gift of music storming through me? It howls out my fingers when I reach into God's mouth of piano, grabbing fistfuls of sun with each song. It spins me in circles, surrounds me in starshine, mounts my head, hands, and heart till I tell it what it wants. Tell it how we are all one wave of notes in the dark gospel of the universe. Can't you hear the chorus of moonlight? Can't you see the way each note shines? It's all right here just beneath the skin, like something I seem to remember. The sound of my mother crying, how her hands danced across me, free, flying.
You know, I read that poem, and I was curious whether you knew Jeffrey Allen, Because
Yes.
Jeffrey Allen wrote Song of the Shank, which came out in 2014, a big 600-page book.
Yes.
Did you guys have any conversation?
We definitely had a conversation about Blind Tom, and I was in correspondence with Jeff, and he's such a wonderful, incredible, multi-genred artist, multi-genred writer. That what I really respect about him is how he takes time and to go into the history of the moment and of the person and make it live on the page.
Well, you've done the same in your book.
I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm trying.
What can one learn about America from listening to black music?
You know, when you're listening to black music, you're listening to the soundtrack of America. You're listening to the pulse and the rhythm of the everyday of America. And when you follow that pulse from work songs to spirituals, gospel, ragtime, jazz, blues, R&B, all the way up into hip hop, you're listening to that a kind of family tree of sound that brings us into the history of what built America, and that is the institution of slavery that built the economy and helped create this country. So you're listening to really the inner consciousness of the country when you're following that soundtrack.
What about the space in between the notes? For example, and you're a musician, you played harmonica. There's certain things, okay, we hear, but then there's also space and pause. What is that filled in when we look at, say, American history?
Yeah, you know, I think that when you say the space between the notes, I think about the cause and effect. I think about the things. I think about the personal lives of the musicians and the details of their families that shaped the way that they came into the music or into the art. And I'm thinking of the political and economic circumstances that brought them into that space, and also I think of the kind of dreams that they had for themselves. You know, when you're talking about the production of music, particularly after the Civil War, you're talking about black people being able to produce music on their own terms, of their own choice, for their own edification, for their own profit for the first time. And that is the kind of space in between the notes that is a kind of freedom, you know, that is just necessary for the notes to come together and form the story of the people.
You pick up the newspaper, you look at the paper and say, oh, this guy Tyehimba Jess won the Pulitzer Prize, Olio, I'm teaching this class. How do you teach this book? What do you need to know? You're the teacher.
Oh, wow.
It's an award-winning book. Now you want to go in the classroom with it and share it with your students. And you're an English teacher.
Right.
Not an Afro-American Studies Department teacher, but an English teacher. What do you need to know?
You know, what I would say is there's an invitation in the book to do several things. One is to start wherever you want to start. Now, if I'm a teacher, I would start with the kind of narrative that happens between a man that is searching. There's a character in the book that's searching for the story of Scott Joplin, who was considered the father of ragtime, and he's searching and interviewing people around the country for that. But you could start anywhere. You could start with any of the various people in the book. Essentially, the book brings together various African-American creatives from around the time of the Civil War up until World War I, and brings them all together in one act. Olio means a melange of ingredients that come together to form a meal.
A hodgepodge.
Yeah, a hodgepodge. In the context of American theater, Olio is the middle part of the minstrel show, in which a variety of acts came together. So it could be a juggler, a dancer, a singer, a comedian, etc. And the minstrel show was principal American entertainment throughout the 19th century and even into the 20th. In the 20th century, oleo kind of separated and became the basis of vaudeville. So you can see the minstrel show, which is a show created by white folks in order to, which involved them putting on blackface and making caricatures of African Americans, became more or less the basis of American theater. This oleo here is a conglomeration of different artists from that particular time, from around the Civil War until World War I, that were trying to make their craft, express themselves creatively against the backdrop of the minstrel show. So there's Henry Box Brown, there's Cissy Retta Jones, who was the first African-American to sing at Carnegie Hall. There's Edmonia Lewis, who is the most successful African-American visual artist of the 19th century. There's Scott Joplin, the father of ragtime. There's Williams and Walker, who were minstrel show hits, who were responsible for some of the first independent black theater productions. There's the Fisk Jubilee Singers, who came out of Fisk University and spread the sound of the Negro spiritual across the globe. There's the McCoy twins, who were conjoined twins, who were part of a freak show, but later on were able to earn enough money through the freak show to buy the plantation upon which their families had been slaves. So there's all kinds of stories like that in the book, combined to make a kind of oleo to tell this alternative story to the minstrel show.
Now listen to that. If I'm teaching your book, I begin with the bibliography. And I look at the bibliography, and there's a reference to John Berryman's The Dream Songs, which came out in 1969.
Yes.
That seems to be key to your book. You didn't mention that. You mentioned all these names. Talk about The Dream Song by Berryman. Yeah.
Now, I use John Berryman in 1965 won the Pulitzer Prize for The Dream Songs. And in The Dream Songs, he takes on a minstrel character in order to kind of explore his inner consciousness.
This is Henry.
Yeah, this is Henry, right? And what I do in the book is I use the actual person, Henry Box Brown, and I use excerpts from his slave narrative and I use the kind of the sound of John Berryman's poems in the same way that he was trying to imitate the so-called sound of the minstrel show, or the so-called black sound, the American white imagination of the black sound. I incorporate that sound in order to tell the story of Henry Box Brown. So it's like Henry Box Brown using the voice of John Berryman to tell his own story, but putting himself in the box of, because the way Henry Box Brown escaped was he put himself in a 2x3 box in Virginia.
We're not talking FedEx.
Right, there wasn't no FedEx, right? But in a 2x3 box in Virginia and had himself mailed to Philadelphia. That literally came out the box singing, right? In this case, he's in the box of John Berryman's, the sound of John Berryman's poems, but telling his own story and emerging from that. So it's like a juxtaposition of the story of someone who actually had to deal in the throes of the minstrel show.
Now, there's another Brown that's important to your book. If I pick up your book, how do I interpret the work of Jessica Lynn Brown that's included?
Right. Jessica Lynn Brown has these stunning illustrations in the book that that are stark and energetic and give a kind of, they are like the space between the notes of the text of the book. And they frame each of the sections in a way that allows the reader to kind of absorb the book in a much more comprehensive way.
Let me throw a term out on you, get your response, 'cause I know you've done a lot of things with the blues. Duke Ellington talked about transblucency. And Baraka used that, this whole thing about this sort of blue fog that one can almost see through, how we live our lives in the fog. Does that resonate with any of your work, that we this simple sense of blues people, but then this translucency?
You know, the way I relate to that is, first off, I'm a big fan of the blues.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the best things I ever did in Chicago was to really discover the blues close up, watching Buddy Guy, Lefty Diz, and all those folks. I see the blues as being my principal aesthetic. Blues being the ability to bend the note instead of break the note. Blues being the ability to bend the form and adjust the form, adjust the received form in order to create one's own interpretation and unveil one's own.
Let's look
voice.
at form. You've got some. I felt it wasn't like the scratch and sniff books, but you've got some pages that you pull out.
Yes.
Right? One
yes.
page I thought was very interesting was the whole thing of pulling out this page that has a list of all the lynchings and why people are lynched.
Yes.
How did you decide to, or why did you decide to conceptualize the book that way? You can almost tear this out.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the reader is invited to deconstruct the book. The pages.
Your publisher knows that?
Yeah, he knows that. The pages are perforated.
We recycle after we.
The pages are perforated so that the pages easily tear out of the book, and so that you can actually use the poems that are in form in order to manipulate them into different shapes. So you're going from a two-dimensional form into a three-dimensional composition, in much the same way that many of the performers were working in a two-dimensional strata and had to take the received instrument and bend it.
How much influence and input did you have into the design? I mean, we're looking at a large book.
Yes.
We're looking at text that goes in different directions. We're looking at how you're using what input did you have in terms of doing that?
Pretty much total input. The publishers were at Wave Books were just really, honestly, spectacular in their ability to take what I gave them, and you know, most of this is done over computer, long distance these days, but to take it and make it manifest. To be honest, the book turned out better than I thought it was going to turn out.
Well, it turned out really well. It's won an award. But before that, there was Lead Belly.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could read The Father that's in that book.
Yeah, this poem is Father. It's in the voice of Lead Belly, Hoodie Ledbetter, who's at the cornerstone of American folk music. And it's staged essentially at a point when his father is visiting him in prison. Father. Daddy comes to prison, hands empty of acreage and ownership. The price he pays for my crash of cold nerve and craze that flowed a river of Will Stafford's blood at my feet. My father comes in June, clutching the sum of his life under penitent palms, cash on the counter for my prodigal hide. My father comes on stilted legs of age, his hands blistered prayers holding greenbacked promises, a negotiation waiting to happen when he sees the warden, unleashes the stones in his voice to beg my pardon's price. My father comes dying, body of bent birch, whispering all my youth's secrets. His steady climb onto each morning's sun-risen shoulders from our farm's horizon as he cleared each acre of pine to shove cotton's white face from soil through fingers dirty with sharecrop dream. He stands before me, slammed down to this, his stare into the numbers striping across my chest as he tells me how no price can buy my freedom. My father comes to barbed wire mesh of my home, tells me how time has wrapped its fist around his skull, shut itself tight in the moment before numbered days and weeks unravel themselves. Release him back to dust and gravel he no longer owns. In November, he is gone.
Have you taken this book, Lead Belly, into the prison system?
I have had occasion to read it in some occasions in prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are a couple of prominent African American writers who have gone through the prison system, and I think they're both friends of yours. I'm thinking of Randall Horton,
Yeah.
also Dwayne Betts.
Yes.
And I wonder, in terms of taking on books like this, the subject matter, are you at times discussing that prison experience?
I think that talking about, when you're talking about the blues experience, and when you're talking about the African American experience, the prison is always looming in the background and sometimes in the foreground. So I know both those writers, and they are inspirations to me in many ways. So sharing those books with them, as a matter of fact, I remember reading Reginald Dwayne Betts, like pretty much right after Leadbelly came out, and him talking to me about him relating to it while he was in prison. So I think that it speaking about Leadbelly in prison in the 1920s is really an effort to talk across the decades into the present.
You talk about Randall, you talk about Dwayne. You remember Copy Conham.
Yes.
What impact, looking back, do you feel that when you went to that workshop, it laid the foundation for you receiving the Pulitzer Prize in 2017?
I'll say this, pretty simply. I don't think I would be here without Copy Conham.
Why is that?
Well, Copy Conham, I entered CC in 1997. That was the second year that it was of its existence, and what it provided for me at that time was what I absolutely needed. I needed a group of black writers that were serious about the page, that were voluminously read and challenged me to rise above where I was. And they provided that kind of community. They provided that kind of network for me to also see other pathways. To see, for instance, to convince me to get my MFA, right, which I had no real clue about what that whole world was about, and to really get serious about my work. It's hard.
Let me ask you a serious question. Is it possible to workshop the black experience?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's possible to workshop the black experience, but what I would say is that it is possible to be in a room of black poets and see the black experience exhibited and examined and questioned on the page. And through that experience, that is a black experience. And to have that kind of input and pull and gravity thrown into your work is invaluable.
Let's look at the music thing. I think Etazaki said this, that we would not confuse, like, say, Lee Morgan with Wayne Shorter or Brown, but we want all our black writers to sound alike. If we look at Copy Conham, right, because it is a workshop, is it possible if I listed a couple of writers, I could say, okay, that person sounds like Cornelius Eady. That person sounds like Toy Durka. Is it possible that because I'm in a workshop and someone now is in a teaching position, that my sound might be similar to theirs?
It is possible that your sound may be similar to theirs, but the other side of that is that the only way that it's always a challenge to sound like yourself. Didn't Miles Davis say it takes a long time to learn how to learn how to sound like yourself? Right,
but there was also Barack who wrote a thing about how you sound, and I remember him saying that he was sitting, I think, in Puerto Rico. He's reading Poetry magazine, and he's reading the magazine. He said he started to weep because he realized that he would never be able to write like this, nor did he want to. And and I say this because at one time, if you came out of the Iowa workshop, somebody said your fictions had a certain sound, like, oh, you must have went to the Iowa workshop. And I was wondering if that's the situation with Copy Conham.
Well, I have been, CC has hit 20 years, last year. So I don't think that has happened yet. So
I bet you there's a young guy out there who wants to sound like Tyehimba Jess.
Well, then I would tell him, no, you got to sound like you.
Now you know you sound like? You sound like Charlie Parker stuck talking to Sonny Stitt.
I love this. I love, because what I love about this is that the music and the literature are completely, in my mind, they're inseparable.
Let me ask you a quick question. I asked Gwendolyn Brooks this many years ago. Where were you when you found out that you won the Pulitzer Prize?
I was in Chicago on the South Side, and at home, and a friend of mine, Patrick Rosal, texted me, and he said, "Pulitzer Black," and I was like, "What? Nah." And so I looked on the computer, and they were actually live announcing it, and then I saw them.
So they didn't say La La Land?
Exactly. And they said my name, and I just fell out. It was a incredible moment. Yeah.
I think it's critical, but it's very well deserved.
Thank you.
And I admire what you've been doing.
Thank you.
And I think many years ago you were one of the 18 poets that Poets and Writers said to follow that would be changing the landscape of American literature. And I think you're sort of like the New England Patriots. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on HoCoPoLitSo, The Writing Life. I'm Ethelbert Miller, and our guest today has been Tyehimba Jess. Tyehimba Jess has recently received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry.